Travel restrictions that have been in place since the beginning of the pandemic are set to expire next week, which means U.S. borders will open up for non-essential travel. Some have said the end of this policy could spark a rise in migration at the southern border amid already high levels of illegal border crossing.
In June, U.S. border agents stopped more than 188,000 immigrants trying to cross the southern border, marking the largest number of monthly border crossings since 2000. You heard that right. Political editor at the Federalist, John Davidson, joins us now to discuss. John, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
John, we've heard Kamala Harris talk a lot about addressing the, quote, root causes of these patterns in migration. But what's actually going on? What is behind this surge? It seems overly simplistic to lay it precisely at Joe Biden's feet. But how much of this actually is connected to the Biden administration's approach to the issue?
I think most of it is. I think root causes and talking about root causes is a little bit intellectually dishonest. There are always going to be root causes in terms of the push factors that are pushing people to leave their countries. A lot of countries are poor, a lot of countries are corrupt, and they always have been, right? Central America has always had the problems that it's facing today. And so those factors will always be there. But what's different and why we saw a sudden surge in illegal immigration as soon as Biden was sworn into office is because the pull factors, the policies that we put into place here do make a difference to people when they're determining whether or not to make that dangerous journey north. And the policies Biden put in place triggered a surge of illegal immigration, and that surge is continuing now at a time of the year when we should see apprehensions decreasing. They're still increasing.
So when you say, though, that it has always been that way in Central America, what do you mean? How long do you draw that timeline around always?
Just going back multiple administrations for decades and decades, Central America has had corrupt government and a very bad economy. So poverty, gang violence, government corruption, these are things that span administrations, and they span different kinds of border policies that we've had in place. And when you look at what changed in Central America between November 2020 and February 2021. A series of executive orders and messages from the White House came out that I think encouraged people to come on the belief that they would be admitted if they got across the border.
So, John, in your recent trips to the border, what are you hearing from the ranchers, from the law enforcement that you're talking to about, A, what the influx actually looks like, how severe it is, and B, why people? I mean, you wrote recently about the incredibly tragic circumstance of a pregnant woman who died trying to come to the United States. What are you hearing from the border and your trips to the border about what's drawing people here in such high numbers?
Well, the people down along the border, law enforcement, landowners, ranchers, longtime residents, all kind of say the same thing. It doesn't matter what part of the border you go to. They've never seen anything like this, or at least not in years and years. The woman who drowned that you mentioned, that was in Del Rio, Texas. She was from Haiti. And Del Rio has been experiencing a surge of illegal immigration unlike that community has ever seen. And these are not mostly Central Americans or Mexicans who are crossing there. It's Venezuelans, Cubans, Haitians, even people from, as far away as Uzbekistan are crossing in Del Rio. So different parts of the border are having different experiences. But the common thread that I hear is that it's worse than it's ever been, or at least it's worse than it's been in a long, long time. And, and people are concerned. I hear from local law enforcement that there's been an increase in things like high-speed chases, or what they call bailouts, where a truck will just drive into the ranch land and everybody bails out and runs. Law enforcement only catches a few of them. Arson, burglaries, things like that are pretty common now along the southern Texas border, and those communities are worried. That's what I hear.
So, and John, you talked about gang violence. You talked about political corruption. Given the U.S. role in fueling so much of that over the past few years, a lot of the gangs were generated by U.S. deportations of gang members. A lot of those corrupt political leaders were installed and backed by the United States. What do you think the U.S. moral responsibility is for that situation? And related to that, we're seeing a surge in children who don't have family in the United States. In the past, children who crossed the border unaccompanied at least said, I have an aunt who lives in Virginia. I have a grandmother who lives in Kentucky, and then government can connect them and get them sorted through that process. You're now seeing a lot of children who don't even have that connection, which to me reflects a real collapsing of society, particularly in Central America, where people don't have the same family connections that they did a generation before, as communities are kind of eviscerated by what we've been seeing everywhere.
Being preyed on by cartels, by the way. These children are coming through this, being facilitated by cartels.
And so they're coming here with no family in the country, a young child being sent on this desperate journey, which to me suggests that push factors are the ones that we really have to take into account. And so I'm curious what you think our responsibility is to those children.
Yeah, so there's a lot of questions in there. What our responsibility to minors who show up unaccompanied, I think is pretty clear. We take them into custody. We try to figure out where they're from. We try to figure out if they have family in the United States. And there's a bunch of different ways that we can do that, and policies that we can adjust around that shift from administration to administration. As for sort of like the overall state of Central America, you're talking about things that happened decades ago. The release of
the Honduran coup was pretty recent. Right.
The Honduran coup was really pretty recent. I don't know if you're saying that we fomented that, or I thought you were referencing the release of prisoners, the formation of some of these street gangs in the 80s and 90s that were formed in U.S. prisons. People were deported back to Central America, and and then these gangs sort of took off, and now they sort of have worked with the cartels, and the cartels do work with Mexican cartels, work with some of these gangs for distribution in the United States. So all that to say, there's a lot of history here, and the U.S. has been involved in Central America. I think that we do have a responsibility, not necessarily to, nation build in Central America, but we have a responsibility to the American people that we don't allow the nations to our south to collapse into chaos and become narco states. The president of Honduras, right now, his brother was arrested 2 years ago for drug trafficking. And he's going to be put on trial. President of Honduras has been implicated in drug trafficking. So these are not, real countries that we can sort of partner with. And we need to start thinking about immigration and the border in terms of national security and regional security, and not just as a domestic political issue. I realize that's a short, maybe unsatisfactory answer, but yes, to your point, we do have a role to play. And if anything, we have been negligent for far too long in Central America and Mexico, allowing these places to descend into chaos.
That is a great point. Well, yesterday, President Biden pledged to appeal a federal judge's ruling that deemed DACA illegal, the Obama-era policy that has protected hundreds of thousands of young immigrants, some born here, from deportation, and he renewed his calls for a permanent solution. John, what do you make of this as somebody who follows the issue closely? Where do you see this going from here?
It's about time somebody recognized DACA for what it is. It's an email from Janet Napolitano. It's a memo. It basically just, by executive fiat, creates this program that is completely illegal, according to the Administrative Procedures Act. You have to have Congress do something like this, and for good reason. We can't just have administrations creating entire programs and new classes of immigrants or of aliens out of whole cloth. This is what the Trump administration attempted to kind of do. They attempted to end DACA, and it was done in such a way that it wouldn't be able to be easily ended. But I'm glad to see this is coming to the forefront. I'm glad that a judge has recognized that DACA is an illegal program, and hopefully it will prompt Congress to actually do its job. If Democrats in Congress want to do something about this group of people, then they should figure out a way to work with Republicans and do something to create a solution here. But just having bureaucrats creating programs and basically writing immigration law through memos is not the way we should be doing things.
Do you think there's any chance that Republicans end up supporting this, if not necessarily voting for it, at least voicing support for it? I know John Cornyn number 2 Republican in the Senate, has said, let's just do DACA. Like he used to hold it out.
Trump said that a couple times as well.
Yeah, they used to hold it out as kind of the sweetener that would get comprehensive immigration reform done. But I guess there's so much cynicism now about that potential that they're saying, let's release the hostages and actually allow these people to move on with their lives.
I hope so. As Emily just mentioned, Trump was very keen to do something about the Dreamers, and he wanted to trade some funding for the border wall for something with the Dreamers. I think there is some Republican appetite to sort of solve this issue and kind of put it to rest. I think everybody agrees in principle that children brought here against their will, who have been allowed to stay and live their entire lives in the United States, shouldn't be deported. I think every reasonable person agrees about that. And the question is, what do we do? Do we just issue a blanket amnesty? Is that going to exacerbate the problem and send the message to families in Central America and Mexico that you should send your children, and make a bad problem even worse? But I do think that there's room for compromise here, and as I said, the Trump administration wanted to compromise with Democrats on this issue, and they wouldn't do it. So hopefully, there's maybe some appetite for compromising now that there wasn't a few years ago.
Absolutely. John Daniel Davidson of the Federalist, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You can and should read John's in-depth reporting on the border, often from the border, over at the Federalist. But we'll have more rising for you after this. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our new content.